Hey everyone, Andre here to talk even more about Paper Mario the Origami King, along with my good friend now being Xander from Nintendo World Report. How's it going, Xander?
Hello, Andre. Good to see you again.
You as well, my friend. So, we've been both playing this game a ton, obviously. We both beat it. We both just posted reviews on it. So, which, by the way, I was up until 5 a.m. working on. So if I fall asleep during this discussion, I apologize.
That's okay. I can carry on the conversation by myself. There's a lot to talk about.
Perfect. No one even knows I'm missing. So, so I thought it'd be fun for us to sit down and talk even more in depth about this game, even beyond what we could in the review or in the preview portion, and just give our overall thoughts. Now, there are still some aspects of the game we won't be touching on, at least for this portion of the discussion. We may have a spoiler portion afterward. I'm not quite sure how we're handling this yet. But for right now, you don't have to worry about any major plot spoilers at all. So with that out of the way, let's just get to our overall thoughts. Xander, where did you land on this game overall?
Overall, I really liked this game considerably. It was a pretty great experience. I gave it a 7.5, which for the NWR scale that's pretty good. There are some hiccups that I noticed, particularly around how that game is handling the RPG mechanics and mixing it with what the world is designed as, and also the new puzzle mechanic. But by and large, this was a great experience. The world was amazing to explore. I loved the music. It's got some laugh out loud moments, which I think I've come to expect from Paper Mario. But overall, great time.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you said there individually, but I think my overall take is just a little bit lower, or a little bit less excited than yours, because
Sure.
I was very mixed for most of the experience, and this is like one of the reviews I've probably struggled with the most, or at least I probably would have more so up until the final part of the game, because it was during my final play session with the game, where I was playing through the final 8 to 10 hours, that I felt like it really just hit a stride, and everything kind of clicked into place. It had a good flow. I enjoyed the combat. I enjoyed the bosses. I enjoyed what was happening with the narrative, what it was building up to, including the climax and the whole final battles, which again, we're not touching on anything specifically there, which kind of sucks. The best part about the game is the one we can talk about the least. But yeah, that's a part that actually really elevated the entire experience for me. Up until then, I had to review the game at any other point. I almost certainly would have given it a mixed in our scale. Where I'm like, yeah, it has good points, it has bad points, or low points, I should say, more specifically. And I was mixed overall. But the final part of the game really just kind of like redeemed it for me and elevated it up to a like on our scale. But yeah, overall, I thought it was good. It had some really good parts, but it definitely, there is room for improvement. I think one of the things that's most interesting about the game is how it does deliberately, seemingly, harken back to the earlier Paper Marios, which most everyone wants them to do, but they don't quite go the full distance with it. That's kind of the weird thing. It's still very much doing its own thing, which I'm totally cool with. It's just odd that they do call back to previous games without leaning into them perhaps as much as they could.
Right, yeah, I'm all for experimentation, and it does not need to be a sequel to the Thousand Year Door, as much as I would like that, because I do really enjoy that game. I'm totally cool with it doing its own thing. It just has to iron out these issues that it's got going on. And hearing you talk about it just now, it kind of made me think that, really, I feel like other than the end game, you could probably swap around these chapters. They're not actually chapters, but like these different regions of the world. I feel like sure, they're chapters, right? It's still a linear progression. You could kind of swap them around a bit, and I don't feel like the difficulty would be too different. I mean, maybe the numbers are a little different in terms of damage, but by and large, like, I kind of agree that, it's kind of a mixed experience throughout the middle portion of the game, whereas the strong points are certainly at the beginning with the setup, and then from the last chapter onwards, it ends quite strongly.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. It's like an inverse bell curve. The beginning and ends were the high points for me, and the middle had pockets that were really good, but it was definitely a little bit more of a mixed bag during the main chunk of the game. But yeah, the way this game begins, I really enjoyed with you catching a ride to Peach's castle, getting basically kidnapped or held prisoner as you kind of escape out of it, and you meet King Ollie. You end up in the woods where the trees are like whispering about you, which was just a fun little touch I really enjoyed.
Yeah, when we got the review copy for that, I was like, I could play this tomorrow, because I got it fairly late at night, and I was like, no, I'm excited, I want to try this. And so there came a point where I was like, am I hearing voices right now, or is this the game?
You're actually just going insane.
I thought I was going insane. Yeah.
Yeah. What I really like too is how the trees are. They're not just talking. They're actually reacting to what you do. Which is
they look at you and they move.
Yeah.
A little. Their eyes
yeah,
move.
and they comment on the exact actions you have or are taking. And yeah, that's the parts that like really. Those are my favorite parts of Paper Mario. Like in general, like when they do things you don't expect and are kind of like weird and off kilter, but are fun and unique on their own. And there's still plenty of that throughout this game. I think my biggest issue is that the pacing of it all is, for me at least, it felt a little odd, where I would encounter something I really enjoyed, but then it'd be a pretty long stretch of, until the next part. And what was really fun was, or not fun, but interesting to me was when I was looking through my footage. I'm like, man, there were quite a few like good moments in this game that I enjoyed. But then, I'm like, well, there was a lot that happened between them two that didn't really stand out to me. Partially, being the battles, which by their nature I don't think they would stand out in any game. Whether you would like the system or not, they just are a thing that exists. But I think part of the issue too is with the more open nature of the game, or I shouldn't say open, but the interconnected world, as you were saying now, as opposed to the chapter-based system from before, is that you do spend a lot of time in these single areas now, unlike, say, in Color Splash, where you're being quickly moved from one level to the next via the world map. And I think for each of these areas, they didn't have like the overarching mystery the Thousand Year Door had in its chapters that I really enjoyed, helped pull me through. Whereas these were more like just kind of like, somewhat vaguely interesting areas, but there wasn't anything, for the most part, inherently interesting happening within them, narratively, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that, with a game like the Thousand Year Door, each environment feels like it has like a certain purpose, especially in the context of the narrative. Whereas, while this game has great characters, I didn't think that the narrative really asked for specific areas. It was more of just, hey, we thought of some really cool environments, so go have fun exploring them, which was fun. It's just like, there does come a point where you're like, why am I here right now when I should be going over there,
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting in that way.
Yeah, no, totally. I pretty much agree with that. So, but yeah, with that said, there are moments even in that middle section that I had a great time with. In the Ninja Town, or Ninja, I keep calling it Ninja Town. The game calls it a Ninja theme park, but it barely feels like a theme park to me.
Yeah, it felt like a town. There's like a photo area and like a place where you can throw shurikens, and that's kind of it. That's
basically it, yeah. But I love the training facility there, when you're going through and you're like looking for the little ninja toad. Yeah. There's some fun activities that happen within that whole structure. Let's see. The most of the entirety of the purple ribbon section where you're on the boat and you're sailing around, love that. If only mostly for the music. I really love the music.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was like, oh man, am I playing the Wind Waker all of a sudden? What's going on?
It legitimately reminded me of the Wind Waker, just with a far higher camera angle. But that was actually pretty fun to sail around, like look for these islands. You even have the sea chart, which Nintendo wouldn't let us show for, I presume, spoiler reasons, because they would just straight up show you where everything is. And yeah, that was fun. It was neat to have that kind of like expanded adventuring element to the game, which I don't think any of the Paper Mario's quite touched on. The closest I could think of, actually, would be the desert in Paper Mario 64.
Yeah, it's a very large area like that, and it's all one big screen too, other than like a loading screen in between the islands.
Right.
But yeah, that sea was one large world. Did you go to the end of the world to see how they would prevent you from
totally
going off?
Okay. Yeah, no, that was like the first thing I did. Yeah, the giant blooper pops up with like a no sign.
The giant blooper with a big sign. That's good. And then I don't want to spoil this, but I will say, like, listeners, go back to Toad Town after you unlock the ocean area and talk to the guy who gives you the boat, because it'll make traversing a little easier.
Oh my god, yes, do that. Right. Because I actually was starting to get annoyed at points of that chapter, despite how much I like the music and the idea, until I went back to Toad Town just for some unrelated reason. I think it was because I didn't know what to do next. I'm like, all right, well, let me get out of here.
Okay.
And then I'm like, oh, here's a thing that would have been useful for the last hour. Thanks, game, for telling me about that. And
yeah, I didn't find that until like post game when I was looking for the collectibles that I had missed, and I was like, oh, this would have been nice to have had before I had cleared that area.
Yeah, there's a few things like that too. Like you find like there's this assist option you can unlock, like is literally on the option screen that appears as a series of question marks. There's a few of them actually, and you have to return to areas you've already been to at some point in order to gain access to them, I believe. And the game doesn't even tell you about this, and which is so weird because they are, at least the one I have, is like basically an accessibility feature. So it's odd that they hid it.
Yeah, it's really strange.
It's so weird. It reminds me a little bit of how in Wind Waker HD they added the Switch Sail, which is such a great item, but the game doesn't even tell you that it exists there, that I recall, and you really have to know about it going in. It's like, no, they should have just made that a standard feature. It makes the game better. It shouldn't be something you hide. So
yeah, while I was playing, I was like, what are these question marks in the option menu? Like, that certainly has to have a purpose for like something I'm going to like a feature they haven't given to me yet. But no, I think it's the battle training area.
Yeah.
You go back to that and they give it to you. But I was like, I didn't go there very often. I didn't need to. I kind of started there as like a little tutorial, and then I moved on because I didn't think I needed to spend much time there. But it's very strange how that's handed out to you.
One thing that I think this game does really well across the board is the presentation. I think like the visuals are great. Definitely, reminiscent of Color Splash. But they still do a great job of making everything look like it's made of paper, except when they're intentionally not, like when the water pours in the mountain region, and I love how good that water looks.
Do you remember the Miiverse, the guy who would always comment about every game's water?
I know. I hope he comes back for this one, because that water I mean, partially I think the water just looks good by itself, but especially in contrast to everything else being paper, like it looks especially good. And like it was making me thirsty. I'm like, oh man, I want to drink that water.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Then of course we've already touched on the music, but by and large the music is fantastic in this game. Like the best tracks in the game are among the series' best, I would say, including I love the title theme, I love the battle theme, I love the ocean theme. There's plenty of other tracks that even if I'm not up to like that, even if they don't stand out to that level, like they're still very good.
Yeah, it's great, and I know I'd mentioned this to you before we were recording, but there are certain areas if you return to that where the music tracks will change after you've kind of completed that segment of the world. Just assuming if you're going back to find collectibles. So really neat that they've kind of added that extra layer of musical interest. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Like Nintendo does it. Like they usually they do a pretty good job of like paying attention to the music, but I didn't even expect that of them to actually update those themes. And they've done things like that before, where like the main town theme, including in this game, expands the deeper you get. Or the world map. But it sounds like they're taking that even farther here, which is fun to see. And that kind of ties into another point I wanted to make. But before I make it, let me touch on something else related to the presentation, which is the writing. Like the writing's really good in this game. I didn't find it to be as funny as Color Splash, which did disappoint me on one level, but I thought Color Splash was hilarious. I realize not everyone feels the same way, but I love the dialogue in that game. But even if it's not quite as good for me, or quite as funny at least I should say, it's still very strong throughout. There are parts that made me laugh out loud, and even when it's not being funny, it's still really well written. But one thing I did miss out on though is that you mentioning how if you revisit past areas the music changes. I was disappointed that unlike in say Thousand Year Door, the dialogue doesn't really get updated that much in this game. Like Toad,
doesn't.
Toad Town, the Toads for the most part, as from what I recall, always say the same things. If you return to previous areas, like it doesn't really get updated at any point. Which stood in stark contrast to Thousand Year Door, where the central town is constantly evolving, where the characters are always saying something new depending on what you just did in the game. So I thought that was something that I wish I had improved a little bit to make it feel more like there's more of a narrative here, and that everyone's kind of in on it. But like, by and large, like people don't really care about what's happening in the world around them in Color or in Origami King.
Yeah, well, it's strange because, every time you complete a segment of the world, Toad Town, like the music kind of rebuilds itself. It becomes a little more grandiose, and there are all the toads that you save throughout the game usually end up there to kind of repopulate it. So naturally you'd want to go back to kind of re-explore that, but a lot of them are still standing in the exact same spot, and they have the exact same thing to say you. So like I didn't really feel like weeding through, for lack of better words, to look for the toads that I hadn't talked to yet, just because I couldn't remember who I hadn't talked to beforehand. But yeah, it's interesting. Like that was the decision they made there. for all things said, it made the liveliness of the town just a little bit lower because of the repeated dialogue. But again, I still really liked Toad Town, and that music's pretty good.
Yeah, the music is good. So that's interesting to say you like Toad Town. Did you find yourself revisiting it much throughout the game?
Not really. I mean, I did with the fast travel,
Right.
but I started to after I'd complete a few areas, but after maybe the third world, I was like, okay, there's really no reason for me to keep going through this place.
There's not a whole lot going on there. So I was barely in Toad Town, except when I had to use it as a hub, basically. But otherwise, I don't think I ever really revisited it, aside from that one time I intentionally did so with a boat, and it ended up being the right decision. But yeah, I wish Toad Town had been a little bit more fleshed out, which is odd to say, but it's probably the biggest town in Paper Mario or Mario RPG history. There's just not like
it feels like it's huge.
Yeah, there's just not a whole lot to do there. Like I think I recall even liking Color Splash's central town better. I think that actually had more of an evolution. Well, I think part of it is because the things you would collect in that game, like your primary objectives, would actually add to the town. Like they would appear in the central hub or influence it. Whereas that's not really the case here because Peach's Castle isn't even in the hub anymore. It got relocated. So the things you're doing no longer really or don't really impact the town. So yeah, I mean it's a small complaint.
I think everything in Color Splash's what is it called, Port Prisma?
Yeah, Port Prisma.
Everything in there felt like it served a purpose.
Right.
Whereas with Toad Town, there's a lot of just vacant houses that you go through once you first arrive there. But again, after you have moved on, there's really no reason to return to that area. And I think the Thousand Year Door has that a little bit too. But Toad Town just felt like because it was lacking with things to do there, it felt more glaring.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think part of it too for me is like with how slow Mario moves, I just didn't want to cross that freaking town more than I had to.
Yeah,
as well.
Right.
And I think I stopped at the item shop like once in town, and that was pretty much it. But, I mean, there's other towns too, or other, if not towns, like shops you can stop by. So yeah, I never found much of a need to buy there specifically. Right. Well, I think we should talk about the battle system, which is, as I said in the review, I think this is going to be divisive. It's so weird to me because on the one hand, like it makes the battles more meaningful or more distinct than ever before. Like it's like at times it's a fun system where you're solving these puzzles. On the other hand, they step back from Color Splash in that there's no XP this time. Literally making them pointless. although I don't know if I would say that's entirely the case. But yeah, you don't earn any actual like XP for it. And the battle system, like the actual like action portion, is probably the most. I don't want to say mindless because that seems more derogatory than I mean it. But perhaps the most simplistic it's ever been because you don't have to think about what you do.
Right. Yeah. You don't choose the enemies in particular. It's just pick the group of enemies and then pick the right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not strategic.
That's exactly it. There's no strategy to the battles. It's entirely based on. I mean, your strategy, if you want to call it that, your actions are entirely based on how you perform in the puzzle portion, in which you align the enemies in order or in rows. The better you do, the more enemies you're going to have consolidated, so you can attack more at once, while also getting a performance boost if you line them all up properly. At which point you either just, as you said, use a hammer or jump attack, depending on which group of enemies you want to target. So yeah, these enemies. So I've seen a lot of people instinctively respond with no XP, like no interest, or no XP, right? And it's like, I get that on one level, but on the other hand, but I famously hate a sticker star, but for far more reasons than just the lack of XP. But But I think it's important to look at these as not just battles. Like these are more like puzzle-based obstacles, and I think when you look at it in that lens, they get more. It's more tolerable or more understandable. I'm not saying I love them, but there were times where I enjoyed them, but there were others where I just tried to avoid them, and it kind of treated as if more of a, here's this obstacle that I encountered that I didn't avoid the enemy properly, how do I deal with this now? But what's your take on the battle system?
I liked the puzzle aspect of it. I just kind of thought, like you, that it felt a little pointless when you didn't get anything that would add to your character. It felt like they had baked in these RPG elements that just didn't need to be there. Like when you deal damage to an enemy, you see the number of damage that you do to them, but there's no health bar for the enemies. So it's like, what's the point if I don't even know how much? Like, how do I know which attack to pick That's me looking for the strategy when there really isn't one.
Right.
You just kind of...
The only indication they give you is the enemies will hunch over when they're weak.
Right, they look a little tired, which is like, at least Color Splash showed you like how much paint was left on the character, which isn't good in itself, but like at least that was something.
Yeah.
This is just they look tired. So there's that, and then without like having, like they're trying to use coins as like this form of progression by buying things, and there are a few key items that you have to get using coins, but it's not too hard to get them, and if you I think if you buy a certain number of items, things will kind of go down in price anyway. But yeah, lots of RPG stuff that just felt like it didn't need to be there. I almost wish that like they didn't have any of this RPG stuff, and the game might have been a little more it might have been better if they just had like, I don't know, like posted puzzles or areas where you could complete puzzles like that. I don't know if optional is the right word, but like rather than like you risk having to run into an overworld enemy, I almost wish that there were just like a list of puzzles for you to encounter, kind of like in Professor Layton, where you can like earn things through that, which could have added to the collectathon aspect of it, rather than you having to just feel like you're avoiding battles if you're not interested in doing that. I feel like that's a bit of a bigger discussion for sure, but like that's just kind of like where my mind's at with it, because again, these RPG mechanics, they don't really feel needed, and I know a lot of people want it to go back to an RPG. I wouldn't mind that, but I don't think it has to be that. I just wish that they wouldn't, like I said in my review, they need to pick a lane and stick to it rather than trying to cater to two, because Paper Mario, they keep changing it so much. It's like, what fan base are you now? Because every game is so different. That's
what basically I was saying in my review. It's like it's trying to be it's a jack of all trades but a master of few of them. Like in this one in particular, as I said earlier, like they're bringing back elements of the past, such as the partners, the lack of a single-use inventory, as well as a single interconnected world. But then they don't go far enough with it, and it kind of ends up in this weird like mishmash of ideas. And I think, it still works. I still enjoyed this game. I liked it in the end, and I think as I said, the final few hours are really good. But yeah, it's weird that they haven't quite committed to what I thought was like what might have been a new direction of like Color Splash. Where I'm like, okay, they kind of ironed out. I was gonna say hammer out the issues. That probably would be a better way. They hammered out the issues largely with Sticker Star. It's not perfect, but they're getting there. I really enjoyed it, and if they keep it going this direction, this could be something like really freaking special. But this one almost seems like a step back from that and a return to the original while still doing its own thing at the same time, which I still respect. Like I said at the beginning, hey, you have to respect the series for trying something new. But yeah, it's just weird that's not mastering really any particular element of it, and that's the thing that we're kind of missing. It feels a little, I don't want to say this because it's almost too mean, although by saying that it's going to upset some people, but it reminds me a little bit of 3D Sonic in a way, where they keep just trying new things, and and when they do figure out something that kind of works, they don't double down on it, they just kind of keep off, they go off and do something else, So yeah,
I don't want to get tinfoil hatty or conspiracy theorist here, but it's almost like I'm trying to like figure out like what was the discussion like when they were making this game, and it's like maybe they committed to this puzzle aspect idea, but then because of the I would hope well-known vocal, because I feel like I see this a lot. People are very vocal about what they want for a Paper Mario game. I feel like maybe that influenced the discussion, and maybe they were told they need to incorporate these elements, and maybe that's what hindered it a bit, because they were again trying to appeal to two fans. I don't know. I'm not saying that is true at all, but like that just kind of feels like maybe that's part of the discussion. I don't know. It's really weird how it's trying to cater to two different audiences, like you said.
Yeah. I do think, I just want to stress that I think we both did enjoy the battles on some level at definitely at points throughout the game. And I think they were hitting on something possibly like brilliant with at least the 360 degree arena. I think the idea of that could be freaking awesome in Paper Mario. Like, not necessarily with the whole sliding aspect. Like I'm glad they explored that for this one, and I thought it was fun solving puzzles. But I think there is like a real good idea there with like having this battle arena where the enemies are around Mario entirely, and if they like carefully choose your attacks, to say focus on, if you want to focus on like a single enemy, a single stronger enemy by itself, or maybe you can attack more enemies that are closer together on the other side,
Like, yeah, think of like a similar setup to, say, the Thousand Year Door, where you have a partner with you, and so effectively you have two movesets and two different turns, and so each character could be focusing on a different aspect or a different slice of the ring. Maybe you have like a giant gooper blooper boss, and so Mario has to take out a few of the tentacles, whereas a different partner has to take out the underlings. I feel like there is like a very neat idea with what they've introduced here. Maybe it doesn't have to be the exact same puzzle idea, but I don't want to see the end of this, because I did really like the puzzle aspect. It's just, again, those RPG things.
Yeah, but there is one aspect of the combat that's really interesting here, too, and that's the fact that they actually have like a real-time combat system with the paper-mache enemies, in which you actually do attack them out like on the world map, using your hammer, using your hammer attacks, and you have to avoid them in real time. I thought that was like a fun way to mix it up, like it kind of made it feel a little bit more conventionally Mario.
It felt like Super Paper Mario, which is like the small representation of that.
Yeah,
game
it really is.
The
one thing that game gets. Here you go. And I thought that was pretty neat. I almost wonder if that shouldn't be the direction that they head in. If I focus more on, maybe Super Paper Mario, like at the time it turned me off, but maybe they were onto something, and maybe that could work in a more 3D play space. And I think they showed it can work here. They could just build more ideas off of it. Some of the boss battles in this game are actually based around that idea, and it worked.
And even Super Paper Mario had some like RPG elements to it that I think people kind of had like maybe a similar issue with. It's like, are you a platformer or are you an RPG? But yeah, I agree with you. The paper mache battles were they were over too quick. They were very fun, and I was just like, I want a little bit more of this, because I am really enjoying myself. But yeah, those are very neat, and there aren't that many of them, but they are very creative when they use them.
Yeah, I think kind of bringing it back to the point you said earlier, like I think if they lean more into the action-adventure side of it, and less the RPG side, I think that would actually probably resolve a lot of the complaints. People stop making the Thousand Year Door comparison. Well, maybe they wouldn't, but it might.
No, they never will.
They'll never end.
The game's pretty beloved.
But yeah, I do wonder that might be a better fit, right? Like, because I really do like the world structure they have here, and maybe my issue with the pacing would have been improved had I not, had to deal with all these turn-based battles on my way to the next point of interest, right? And instead you keep it more action-focused, and maybe incorporate the puzzles in the way, as you were saying, through like, these more like conventional obstacles in the environment or something.
For sure.
Now, there is one other aspect of the battle system we haven't mentioned yet, and that is the boss battles, which are entirely different for some reason. They still use the same grid, but the way it works is completely different. Whereas once Mario was in the middle of the arena, he's now outside of it with a boss in the middle, and Mario has to work his way to it by basically manipulating the rings, almost like to basically. It reminded me a bit of a board game where you have to like position the pieces in such a way they can create this path of arrows. To get your character to the middle, to lead Mario to the middle, along the way, triggering or collecting various things along the way, including heart pieces or activating on switches for the magic circles, all culminating in reaching an action spot next to the boss in which you can actually attack with. What is your take on these? How did you feel about the boss battles in general?
I think, based on having talked to you, I think largely you and I feel very similar about these. I, for the most part, really, really enjoyed them. I liked how inventive they could be with the different takes on this battle system. Sometimes different bosses would remove parts of the board, or you'd have to, or they would maybe like the tape boss. He tapes parts of the world, the dials together, so you end up either having to slide. You can't slide certain things, or you end up rotating two of at the same time. I really liked that idea. I think that maybe this is a smaller issue. I know it's definitely a big one for the Valumental bosses, but I didn't really like how there were some bosses that were very focused on multi-stage or multi-processed aspect. It takes multiple turns to get to the boss's weak point or to get that tell, and trying to get that to happen requires a lot of experimentation. The game does give you a hint system in the form of Olivia and those envelopes, but by and large you still need to experiment with it. And some of the bosses can be a little too punishing, I think, when you're trying to figure out like what the best strategical avenue is to get to the boss. But for the most part, I did really enjoy them. I just thought like the obtuseness of some of them could be a little punishing.
Yeah, I mean, they're obtuse to the point that you literally have to find tip letters on the board in order to just understand what you're supposed to do. And even I didn't find them to be enough for a couple of battles to get me through. There was one tip that actively led me astray because I would say I misinterpreted it, but I'm pretty sure I interpreted it in. I mean, the way I would put the onus of the problem on the writing more than my interpretation of it, because the way is
it the one what I'm thinking of?
The fire element, the fire elemental,
the fire element.
Yeah.
Yep.
Where they I mean, I'll just straight up say it. I mean, if you consider this a spoiler, skip ahead. I'm only helping you out here.
for real though, guys.
Because basically, you have to at some point use the 1,000-fold arms attack on it, and the note suggests that it's a timing issue. Like with the way I read it, the way I interpreted it is I'm not timing the actual attack itself right, in that because you actually do multiple hits when using the attack. I'm like, all right, I'll try spacing out my attacks, and I tried this 4 or 5 or 6 times. None of them are working until eventually I talked to you, and you basically confirmed what I had suspected, in that it's the timing issue is referring to the more abstract nature of timing. When you should use the attack rather than
doing the attack.
I hated that. I hated that battle.
And
go ahead.
I think also the game kind of like subconsciously teaches you. It taught you to do that mechanic because the boss fight right before that one was the rubber band, and the rubber band actually has the component of when you're using the 1,000-fold arms ability. There is a portion of it where you do need to time when to use it, rather than. Whereas with the fire elemental, you have to actually like pick when you're going to use the. It's hard to.
It's hard to say. Yeah, exactly. We're running into the same issue that apparently the writers did.
Right. The game basically those two bosses back to back, they use that mechanic differently, and one would let you think that it's doing it the same way when it's not, and I think that was the problem.
Yeah. So there were. Yeah, I think it was that one, and I think the polar bear one that I specifically had my biggest problems with. And both
that one's
both of those, like I just wanted, like I was at the point where like I wanted to throw my Switch out the window. Like I had not been reviewing it, I might have just quit during those battles. Especially because it's so frustrating because due to the multiple phases of these things, when you screw up or you don't fully understand it, like it feels like you're losing progress because you probably have done some damage to the boss in the meantime. But like in the Firebird's case, it picks up its feathers, I think, and it just regains all its health back, and it feels like you're undoing progress while also being set back in the phase of the battle too, but the boss will revert to like a previous form, and the whole thing is just so frustrating, and I really truly hate those. Despite them being a relatively minor part of the game, they stand out to my mind, just pissing me off on a level that was almost a sticker star levels. Almost, not quite.
Those ones actively punish you for experimenting, especially the Firebird. It's like, what's the point of even trying if you're just going to regain all of your health? Like I had the same situation with you. I think I figured it out a little bit quicker, but by and large, like it's still a very obtuse thing, and I don't even know how younger players would figure this out, even with those extra notes, because I know you and I were both looking at those. It's just it felt very too big for its own understanding in a bit. I know like a lot of people kind of point to this series saying, well, it's too easy now, and I don't know, like that one I'm not looking for it to be super challenging. I just think it was like not written very well.
I mean, I think part of my issue too is with those battles specifically, it's too focused on the puzzle aspect, which I realize is the part I liked in the key battles. But at least, by key battles I mean the primary battles of the enemies, the origami enemies. But the difference in that is, like, even if you fail the puzzle, you can still power your way through. You can still get through those battles, even if you don't even understand how the puzzles work. It'll take you longer, it'll take more damage.
Yeah, I beat the colored pencil boss without doing the 1,000-folded arms thing on accident.
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was specifically talking about the origami enemies, but to your point, I think it's partially why I really enjoyed what were they called? The Legion of
Stationary.
Which are basically like these office supplies. Like those boss battles were better. They still had puzzling elements to them, but they were more intuitive. I think you could probably figure them out without even reading the notes, although I did anyway. And even as you said, it felt like they had multiple ways of getting through it. I like that. That was well done. Whereas the elementals are too focused on the very specific solutions they were looking for, which reminded me a little bit of how boss battles worked in Color Splash and Sticker Star, where you needed these very specific items in order to even finish a battle. Anyway, so luckily after the final elemental, you only have Legion battles left, plus other things, and those are the ones I enjoy the most. Like once I got past the final freaking Vellumental.
I keep saying vellum because it's like vellum paper,
yeah.
So
that's where the game got way better for me, and I really did enjoy those final 8 hours of it getting even better toward the end. Like once you get to Bowser's Castle, everything past that, chef's kiss. Perfect. Great stuff. There's some weird stuff going on there. I loved it. I didn't expect it. I love being surprised. And the boss battles too, I think, just worked better, both because they weren't the Vellumentals, but also because I understood the process better by that point, and just everything was clicking into place, and I loved it. I really enjoyed the whole final segment there.
Yeah, and I think people kind of give crap to the office supplies bosses because they are office supplies, and like I understand that sentiment. I do wish they were a little more original, but I will say like it definitely made the puzzle, like understanding the puzzle, considerably easier. Like okay, this is a rubber band, I understand what it's going to do, or this is tape, I understand what it's going to do. And I can understand like wanting a character to use those things, but designing the puzzles around those was actually, I thought, ended up kind of surprising me in how much I actually enjoyed those.
And also too, I was surprised by how much personality they gave this stationary. Like,
yeah, their animations are great.
The animations are so good. I'm pretty sure I can specifically. I don't want to say it. We can. I don't want to spoil for people. But there is one in particular. The final stationary Legion of stationary you encounter. I love it. I love the way it was animated. I loved how there's kind of like a choice in it, and I loved its dialogue too. These things have dialogue, and I saw a lot of complaints when they first showed off at the stationary. People are like, "Oh, how unoriginal! Like it's just stationary." I'm like, and I was thinking, or I'm thinking more so now, like how often do you see boss battles themed around stationary? And the fact that they're
right.
distinct, I enjoy interacting with them, is to the developers' credit. Like they were fun. I'm reminded specifically of one in the desert region. In the temple, the one you'd interact with there. I love that too, and how like it actually fits with the music they have going on and the animations. It's so good, so good. So,
yeah, that one was pretty good. I won't say what it is, but yeah, that one I agree with you. It was pretty good. I liked them more than the Koopalings from Color Splash. The Koopalings get a lot of hate now, but I do like them. But once you see one of them, you realize, oh man, all of the bosses are going to be the Koopalings. Right. Whereas with this one, it's like, okay, I could kind of see where they're going to go with this, but I'm not sure how they're going to do it. And they end up being a surprising good thing about this game.
Right. Well, I think we've touched on a lot about the game. Are there any other points you wanted to bring up, Xander, before we wrap it up here?
No, I don't think there's anything else I have to say about this. It was a nice experience.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, I mean, I had my definite issues with it, and there were parts where I wanted to quit. But in the end, I am glad I saw it through, because the final part of the game I really did enjoy. Even if I wish the rest of the game had been up to that same standard. There are enough moments in there to warrant sticking with, in my opinion. So I am glad the game ultimately won me over, because, as I said, I was very much in the mixed territory up until that final segment. So it will be interesting to see where the series goes from here, and I believe we'll be discussing that partially on your own channel. So where can people find you at, Xander?
Yeah, so Andre and I are going to be recording a video about where the series is going to be going from here and its comparison to previous titles over at NintendoWorldReport.com, or you can find us on YouTube at NWRTV. You
can find links to all that in the description below. And also, I don't think I mentioned at the start, but there are a few things in this game we can't talk about. Initially, I wasn't sure there was enough for a whole discussion, but I really want to talk about them. So stay tuned for a follow-up in which Xander and I will very likely discuss some of the spoilerish parts of the game that we can't discuss right now. but will very soon. I really want to touch on a couple of things.
Luigi's in the game.
Spoilers! So stay tuned for part 2 of that as well. Alright, with that everyone, thank you so much for watching, and we will catch you next time. Bye everyone!